Joining me now is Krish O'Mara Vignarajah, President and CEO of Global Refuge. She's also the former policy director for Michelle Obama. Krish, it's great to have you back on the show. It's good to see you. Even if before Biden unveiled his new executive order, you had people like Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's anti-immigration policies, calling it amnesty during a border invasion, also referring to undocumented immigrants by a derogatory term, which we won't use here on this show. But how do you fight this kind of dangerous disinformation that is now so synonymous with the conservative right and the Republican Party?
There's got to be a proactive, aggressive campaign to fight fiction with fact. The reality is that we are in the predicament of the anti-immigration kind of sentiment. We're seeing the xenophobia, not just out of Stephen Miller's mouth, but political leaders across the nation. And this is where I think there's a real opportunity to be clear about what President Biden's executive order does. It is one of the most significant executive actions we've seen in the immigration space since DACA. It would allow for families to remain united. It is exactly the type of bold leadership that aligns with public sentiment. Overwhelmingly, Americans support a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who meet certain criteria. I think it's important to highlight that the people who this would impact have been here in the U.S. on average for about 23 years. Their husbands, their wives, their sons, their daughters, they are longtime neighbors who have become vital contributors to the fabric of our communities.
You know, you've probably seen this, but Trump has posted on his failed social media platform that he is planning to blame a handful of horrific murders, allegedly by undocumented migrants, on Biden during this week's upcoming presidential debate. Obviously, it's an absurd and consistently debunked claim. We know factually and statistically that immigrants do not commit crimes at higher rates than native-born Americans. Does President Biden have a higher moral responsibility to challenge this talking point, aside from just his concerns for political reasons?
I think there's absolutely an opportunity. As you said, the data has been crystal clear. I know some have claimed that the border communities are less safe than the communities on the interior. A study has been very, distinctly clear about the fact that the 21 counties that border our country are actually safer than comparable interior counties. When you look at the top 10 cities that have received the highest number of refugees per capita, whether you're looking at economic crime, violent crime, petty crime, they're actually safer than those that have not. And I think this is where I hope President Biden comes out making the case, explaining that our country faces a demographic cliff, that unless we find more immigrants to bolster our economy, to help take care of our children and our parents, to keep Medicare and Social Security afloat, and to frankly make our country safer, I think that this is where there's a normative imperative and there's a responsibility to the American public to lead, to not fearmonger, to not politically grandstand, to not scapegoat and blame immigrants for the fentanyl crisis, but to be clear about the fact that it is not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do for our country to remain a welcoming nation.
You were, Krish, at the White House when Biden announced his new immigration policy, which was also on the 12th anniversary of DACA. How do you balance seeing this as a win while also taking into Biden's executive order earlier this month that restricts the legal human rights to asylum in this country? How do you explain that juxtaposition on immigration policy?
Amen. It's such an important question because the last few weeks in immigration policy have been the tale of two executive actions, and it certainly left a few of us with a case of whiplash. I think the Biden administration is trying to walk a tightrope between keeping our borders secure and humanely responding to people who are fleeing the most dire of circumstances in their countries. I run an immigration nonprofit. Our view at Global Refuge is that it is completely reasonable to want robust systems in place to know who's coming to our country, to make sure that they are vetted. But we also have a duty to protect the people who need our help the most. And so I think that's where we have an opportunity to explain to the American public that we want an orderly, structured system. We want to make sure that people aren't gaming the asylum system, but we also want to make sure that we are true to our values, to our legal responsibility that is codified in U.S. law. But also we're building legal pathways that allow for people to not have to come to the southern border. And so I think that's where we need to make the affirmative case. The system has been broken. I appreciate the fact that President Biden is taking action where Congress has failed to. But I think it is important to acknowledge that we've lived in a broken immigration system for a long while, and political leaders need to lead us out of this.
All right, Krish O'Mara Vignarajah, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.